Hey there, Movie Bob patrons and fans of the full Really That Good series. Please stay tuned after the show for some further details. Any of you newcomers, please enjoy this special preview episode / test to see how much, if any, of this SNL footage NBC will actually let me use. As previous installments of the series have discussed relating to films like Ghostbusters and Star Wars, the transition from the Hollywood of the 70s to the 80s, and with it the rise of the so-called blockbuster mentality in the action and comedy genres, involved a series of steep learning curves for many of the filmmakers and actors who came to specialize in them, specifically a relearning of what the new audience that had returned to mainstream movie theaters now was, and a recontextualizing of what that meant in terms of how and why the films that were becoming hits were becoming hits. Many of the big-scale sci-fi features that immediately attempted to recreate the success of Star Wars, for example, did not precisely understand that George Lucas had not simply won the global audience's attention by making old-fashioned serial sci-fi but bigger. He tapped into a ready-made vein of baby boomer and soon-to-be Generation X pulp fantasy, sci-fi, comic strip, RPG, Saturday morning, cartoon, psychic milieu that was already waiting for him, and in many respects, this was news to even Lucas himself. Comedy, in the era of the post-70s blockbuster, had its own learning curve, but with a slightly different trajectory given that the genre had so long been made to see itself as the second-tier opening act to the spectacle in the first place. The notion that the superstar screen comedian was not only returning but having room for more faces at once than the marquee dominating phenoms of a Martin and Lewis or a Hope and Crosby was the explosive payoff on top of the general 80s comedy mushroom cloud, encompassing the stand-up and improv boom, the sketch comedy revival, and the sitcom rush. But just as was the case with genre film blockbusters, many of the star performers who revolutionized American humor in the 60s and 70s were soon caught off guard by a stark difference between the laughs that had carried them to theaters versus the laughs they might have been looking to chase once they got there.
Whoa! Are we in Metropolis yet?
Nope, I'm just gonna make a little stop, right over there.
Because this is about Adam Sandler and not the history of American comedy, but the context is nonetheless necessary, I'm going to try and condense this as much as possible, so if you know any or all of this already and think it sounds like an overgeneralization on my part, fine, guilty. It's a generalization on my part. Sorry?
Okay, a simple wrong would have done just fine, but
So, most of the comedians who became big movie stars in the early to mid-80s finally broke out as the hip new thing young comics in the mid to late 60s and 70s did so mainly from the realms of improv, underground, stand-up, college humor magazines, satirical magazines, radio and sketch comedy, etc. By and large, the outlets and the individuals who made the biggest impact and thus the most prominent names for themselves did so by successfully combining two schools of humor that previously weren't considered marketable fusion. Urbane, topical, reference-heavy wit that both relied upon but also flattered and rewarded an audience's assumed intellect, knowledge, familiarity with references and current events, combined with the aggressive, puckishly anarchic, often sexually charged, perpetual teenager comic sensibilities of blue humor for time immemorial. Or if you want more of a shorthand on that, Lenny Bruce imitators. This, of course, clicked because these comics' generation of prime disposable income consumers, and for the most part peers, baby boomers, were the then new for the American middle class position of having gone to college in really big numbers, so not only was your mildly racist reference to Sigmund Freud's cigar and your biting observation about the Johnson administration being the same joke actually a mainstream laugh-getter now, it was the new hotness. But after a decade or so of taking these acts from the underground to the albums to the likes of National Lampoon, Second City, and SNL, when it came time for the hip comedy generation to become the blockbuster comedy movie generation, the world had kinda shifted under their feet.
once again, things that could have been brought to my attention yesterday!
To simplify further and get us back on track more efficiently, a lot of the generational and cultural specific subtext that had lifted that whole moment in time receded as it was wont to do, and those that remained didn't all catch on at once that they'd done so because people really liked their text, basically. Think of it sort of like if the Beatles had happened in reverse, you know? Like if the White Album came out first, and then by the time they were on top of the world, it was like, huh, I guess the socially conscious experimental moment is sort of past for people, lads. Oh my. Well, I've got an idea. Maybe we could all get like bowl cuts and sing about girls and dancing for a spell then. I apologize for my terrible John and Paul impression.
Don't you agree, John Lennon?
Yes, Dewey Cox. With meditation, there's no limit to what we can imagine.
What do you think, George Harrison of the Beatles? I don't know, I'm just trying to get some more songs on the album,
And as Ringo Starr, I'm not so interested in meditation. I just like to have fun.
I like the little one.
It's so dark in this tent, It reminds me when the Beatles, the four Beatles, us.
From Liverpool?
Yes, we are from Liverpool. We used to play those dark clubs in Hamburg. You remember that, Paul?
Of course I do. I booked them. I'm the leader of the Beatles.
The canary in the coal mine for this was almost certainly Animal House, i.e. if you look at the arc of that film, the narrative and screenplay, you know the prior history of National Lampoon brand name they were initially selling the movie clearly on. Obviously it's Otter, Boone, Pinto, and Flounder who are the main characters who the writers and filmmakers center and identify with, especially Otter and Boone as the above-it-all erudite hucksters, but the audiences and popular culture immediately determined that as far as they were concerned, the main character of Animal House was Bluto. But the ultimate out-in-the-open definitive flashpoint was probably the production of Caddyshack. Hey, the other classic golf comedy. Now how about that? See, I was going somewhere with this the whole time.
The price is wrong, bitch.
Caddyshack was written and went into production as a rowdy but sincere coming-of-age comedy about two young working-class guys diverging life paths during an eventful summer working as golf caddies at a country club populated by a supporting cast of colorful, wealthy, supporting characters. Since this was a lower-budget early feature for a lot of the behind-the-scenes talent and the main actors, said supporting cast was filled out by a murderer's row of seasoned comedy professionals and some of the hottest names in new comedy, so there would pretty much always be funny stuff happening in the B-plots. Sadly, the production was a famously mishandled disaster, hampered by bad weather, poor management, and an open flow of drug use and off-hours partying and misbehavior. So, long story short, the planned version, if it ever was going to be any good, was basically unreleasable garbage, but all those professional comics they hired to do the secondary characters still did their jobs really well, because they were professional comics.
My dinghy's bigger than your whole boat!
You take drugs, Danny?
Every day.
Good.
I said freeze, gopher! Hey, somebody step on a duck? Hey, I should have stayed home and played with myself.
So the producers threw out almost all the main plot and chopped it up into a wacky slapstick ensemble comedy that also had a crazy puppet gopher, and it became a smash hit comedy classic that audiences loved, even, perhaps especially, younger audiences who were too young to give a shit or understand about the sex jokes or romantic subplots, but liked all the physical humor, curse words, and grown-ups falling down and crashing into stuff, while slightly older teenagers enjoyed feeling like they were getting away with something via those same jokes and the occasional nudity. This would effectively become the operating two-track mode of money-making big-screen comedy in the 80s, perhaps cemented permanently by the high-concept Ghostbusters at the decade's midpoint. Talent who'd honed their act, skill sets, even entire characters and concepts around satirical humor for adult audience, finding their biggest success only when those acts connected with a youth audience where the connection was only to its broadest and most visceral aspect. A youth audience laughed at the physical humor and over-the-top characters in Caddyshack, while the narrative aspect of old money versus new money and the working class battling for supremacy flew over their heads.
Oh, this is the worst looking hat I ever saw. Well, you buy a hat like this, I'll bet you get a free bowl of soup, huh? Oh, it looks good on you, though.
Well, I'll guarantee you'll never be a member here.
Member? Are you kidding? You think I'd join this crummy snobatorium? Why, this whole place sucks. That's right, it sucks. Only reason I'm here is maybe I'll buy it.
Buy? Bushwood?
And you guys, take some more lessons.
A kid audience that could enjoy the Ghostbusters busting ghosts without needing to know which aspect of 70s possession movies or contemporary small business politics were getting arousing, who could get the slapstick appeal of Police Academy even if more than a little of the confused political satire about affirmative action, diversity hiring, police work, etc. didn't register, or Chevy Chase's exasperated flailing in Vacation without needing to relate specifically to boomer midlife crisis anxiety. Hell, arguably a version of this even extends to white Americans of all ages connecting with early Eddie Murphy hits like Coming to America and Beverly Hills Cop, despite both being rooted in extremely specific observational humor about Black American cultural experience clashing against the rest of American experience.
Hey! Did you see this shit? I can describe all of them.
Please move to the side of the car and put your hands on the hood.
Why? What's with you guys?
You heard what he said, sir. Do it right now, please.
What kind of shit is this, man? Hold up. Wait a second. You guys are arresting me for getting thrown out of a fucking window? I got thrown out of a window, man!
And that not every comic who came up through the 70s new comedy revolution in stand-up and TV could strike that two-lane poise successfully was the great sorting of the era, and probably the main reason that comics who broke out in the world of sketch comedy from sources like SNL and Second City very quickly became the presumed go-to source for comedy feature leads, a tradition that largely continues to this day. But Adam Sandler, while he did in fact hail from the world of SNL, was not part of that generation, and thus arrived under related, entirely different circumstances.
And now you're working on Saturday Night Live, so you moved back down to New York, and have you adjusted pretty well to the city here?
Yes, I like the city's very nice. You know, everybody always talks about the weird cab drives. We were driving along, me and the guy, and he killed the dog on the way. He didn't hit the dog with a car, just got out and stabbed the dog.
Oh, no.
Big knife.
Yeah, that's awful. And have your apartment checked for radon when you go home.
By the time Sandler arrived as a featured member of the so-called not-ready-for-primetime players, Saturday Night Live was well into its third generation as a talent farm for would-be comedy megastars, hitting its 1990s stride as a revived entity under the leadership of returning Lorne Michaels.
Man, I'm glad I called that guy.
Sandler had already been performing stand-up and releasing comedy albums of his own, but SNL was where the majority of his audience would first discover him, and right from the get-go it was obvious that something was different about his sensibilities even from the rest of what was at the time one of the most eclectic eras of the show's ensemble.
Out of an estimated 50,000 professional house sitters in the world, the Hurley Boy is by far the best.
Just say yes to me bringing in your mail, please. Don't look away. Look at me. I honestly and sincerely would like to bring in your mail.
He's a good, hard-working boy. Let him bring in your mail.
By the early 90s, the SNL performer formula was pretty well established, with most successful players operating in the mold of the giants who'd come and gone before onto success in many of the aforementioned 80s comedy blockbusters. Your successful SNL, really your successful American sketch show comic in general, would be expected to have at least one or two signature characters who could hopefully become recurring favorites as the star attraction of specific sketches like Wayne's World, Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer, It's Pat, basically the sort of character you could maybe turn into a movie someday, a celebrity impression you could own, and a litany of other personas that could appear in other sketches, guest characters on Weekend Update, whatever. Part of the formula aspect of this was just the logical pragmatism of putting out a weekly show, but part of it is also the aspect of operating within a legacy.
All right, here's the deal. Your name is Donald R.D. Chico. Got that?
Donald R.D. Chico?
Yeah, that's you. D-E capital C-I-C-C-O. You were born August 11th, 1951 in Brockton, Massachusetts.
Brockton, Massachusetts?
Oh, it's a lovely town there. And your name is what?
Donald R.D. Chico?
That's right, you are. It's nice to see you. Your wife's name is Mary Margaret Rowney, born June 26, 1955 in Narragansett, Rhode Island. But you're from where?
Brockton, Massachusetts?
Hey, my mother's from there.
By this point, many sketch comedy pros, especially young guns like Sandler, were in fact young enough to have been themselves the kids watching the Belushis, Aykroyds, Chases, and Murphys jump from the sketch stage to the big time and only get half the jokes until they were old enough themselves.
Boy, they're really socking it to that Spiro Agnew guy again. He must work there or something.
That sense certainly shows up in a lot of cast member memoirs and backstage stories, and so does the common origin story shared by so many comedians in general throughout history of being a class clown or the funny one in their family who learned to act out humorously for attention, affection, or as a coping mechanism and decides to make a career out of it. One more key aspect in which so many children in general relate to comedians.
Some of the kids, anti-Semitic, used to throw pennies at me, but I saved those pennies, and now I have my own business. And I make them all work for me. And I make them call me Mr. Boss Man.
After all, most people, even those who aren't class clowns or never needed to use humor as a defense or to diffuse anything, can probably still remember how exhilarating it was as a child to first discover the idea that certain things were funny, that you could make yourself or other people laugh and feel good and silly, even happy, just by doing or saying absurd, funny, maybe even inappropriate things.
Are there comedians from New Hampshire aside from yourself?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure. I bet if they were, they would be very funny.
Yeah.
funny faces, rude noises, bad words, etc. That specific dopamine hit of "I just got approval for doing something off" is pretty much the bitten by a radioactive spider part of every comedian's origin story, and so it was for Adam Sandler.
I'm away from home. I am away from home. It's horrible being away from home. I talk to my father a lot on the phone. He's always like, marry a girl with the same beliefs as the family. That's a big thing. Marry a girl with the same beliefs. I'm like, Dad, why should I marry a girl who thinks I'm a schmuck, you know?
But while for most comics, kid in the back of the class making fart noises essentially recedes to being only the spark of their overall approach to the form, Sandler took a different approach. In fact, almost an exact inverse to the way post-1970 comedy in general grapples with its own inherent juvenilia. When you look at Sandler's best-known 90s SNL recurring features, One of the Gap Girls, Opera Man, Canteen Boy, comedy songs like Lunch Ladyland and the Hanukkah song, what sticks out is that while the content is pitched at about the same level as the rest of the show's humor, topical events and current popular culture satirized with the affect of a disrespectful edge but still within the bounds of mainstream consensus, the style was something else entirely.
Turkey with the gravy and the cranberry. Can't believe the Mets traded Darryl Strawberry. Turkey for you and a turkey for me. Can't believe Tyson gave the girl BD.
He was unsubtle, he was loud, like play to the back of the theater loud, rarely trying to disappear into a characterization. In fact, the more elaborate the character or premise, the more his performance felt calculated to scream, "This is obviously me, Adam Sandler, wearing a costume, doing a funny voice. Look at me, pay attention to me."
Eddie Vedder's even better looking in person. Oh yeah. Oh, hey, oh, I wish he didn't have a girlfriend. Oh no. Oh, I'm not saying I'm gay. I'm just saying there comes a time in every man's life when he questions his own sexuality. Oh no.
Speaking of which, despite the fact that his later film and music performances would quickly indicate that he does have a real range for impression and vocal transformation, his funny voices were just that. Funny voices in the too nasal, too throaty, or too high-pitched, off-balance variety that every class clown-type child knows is one of the first and easiest ways to get a laugh.
It would mean so much to me if you just let me water your plants. You like it in juice, eh?
Yeah, I do.
Juice is very good, eh?
Yeah, no, it is good stuff.
Thus you arrive at something like formula, or maybe encapsulation, of the breakout-era Adam Sandler approach to comedy. Adult jokes told in the style of kid jokes.
I love you, Mama, more than pastrama, way more than Jeffrey Dahmer.
And remember what I said about 80s and 90s comedy being a period of kid audiences gravitating to the comedy genre even though they weren't really getting most of the punchlines? Well, enter Adam Sandler on Saturday Night Live, delivering material where it was the straight topical setup that the up-past-their-bedtime viewers didn't need to understand, because the funny parts were the timeless, but especially in tune for them, language of funny voices, loud noises, and absurd visuals.
If you're not out trick-or-treating right now, there's a good chance you didn't want to spend the money on a fancy costume. Well, you really don't have to, and you still have time to get loads of candy tonight with my low-cost costume ideas. You can just use your face. Go as about to sneeze man.
Hey, I'm about to sneeze, man, and I want some candy. Look at me all squished up like I'm gonna sneeze. Before I do, could you give me some candy?
Candy? A newspaper's great. You can go as crazy newspaper face.
I'm crazy newspaper face, and I want some candy.
Eat some candy to crazy newspaper face. My face ain't normal, it's a damn newspaper. Come on, extra, read all about me. I need some candy.
Whether by design or by happenstance, Sandler's preferred mode of comedy made him an instant favorite of the kid audience that was tuning into SNL mainly to see popular characters like Wayne and Garth who transcended the not-ready-for-primetime zeitgeist due to their catchphrases and antics, and that's the audience that followed him to theaters and turned the likes of Billy Madison and Happy Gilmore into back-to-back colossal surprise hits. But further, I would argue, the reason his first hot streak was so hot came about in large part because he kept a version of that same energy going.
Being Jewish in New Hampshire was kind of difficult, you know? A lot of the kids started trouble. Some of the kids, anti-Semitic, used to throw pennies at me.
Seriously, you don't understand. This is not for sale.
No, you don't understand, canteen boy. I want that canteen.
So, for the patrons and fans, okay guys, the full Adam Sandler episode is like super overdue. There's no excuse for it other than the same excuse for everything else: pandemic, plague, society falling apart, and me barely keeping it together. You know, hard choices, etc. But it's getting there. What was more or less the heavy lifting parts are basically handled. And with the big picture classic re-upload cycle having finished off, I figured now would be a good time to put together this preview, which is edited mainly from the digressionary section in the middle part that sort of functioned as an episode within an episode, and that I was probably going to spin off into its own thing anyway because it works and stands on its own, and kind of realized that as I was doing it. Also relevant, even though this part was the extra work part, the main reason that I couldn't just power through and get the rest done straight off is that I didn't want to leave you without content right away, and also I'm about to be both very deep into Schlocktober editing for the Escapist shows, and while the details are not really for public consumption, don't worry, everything is basically okay. There's been some IRL business and personal realities of modern life stuff that needs to get sorted out that's going to make October a little bit busier than normal for me, and while that does not mean you're suddenly going to see this channel go sleepy again, like right off. In fact, stay tuned for another video coming up about Patreon and other business in the very near future. It does mean that I thought Really That Good deserved to get at least a preview as an update in case it ends up taking just a little bit longer to finish the Sandler episode. So keep an eye out for that, and I hope you enjoyed this preview.